This is reflections on part 1 in Theosis and Artificial Intelligence. And part 1 is calling. And it's comprised of 9 different chapters, or 10 different chapters. And when we think about listening to a book like this or reading a book like this, artificial intelligence and theosis, Christification, deification, the first thought that we can often have is that the two are complete oxymorons. You know, they just, what's one got to do with the other? But there's a real need for reflecting on it because it's in the world already. And this book, or this work that I'm doing with the Lord, is simply teasing it out, giving us things to think about. The first chapter of the book, How AI Found Kyrillos, is, I suppose, symbolic and reminiscent of how AI finds all of us. I think it was probably 2 years ago I'd really never heard of AI. And when I started to look into the huge array of applications of artificial intelligence around the world, I got a glimpse of how intelligence has become encapsulated and how it, as a digital creature, it's very easily multiplied, very easily falsified, of course, but very easily multiplied and put to great use. I suppose the thing that we think of with spirituality is AI can be so easily manipulated, and a bit like statistics, so easily manipulated. Why would my spiritual life have anything to do with something that isn't intuitive and isn't internal, isn't connected to my interior life and my meeting with God in solitude and silence within myself, where words and knowledge are very often not the priority. Presence is the priority. Love is the priority. The unspoken world is the priority. Why would I find a place within that for transferring endless words, verbiage, just non-stop words that don't often bring unlike elements together? They don't bring the religions together, they don't bring the emotions together, they don't bring the races, the cultures, the languages together. Those words seem to spark more division than the heart is prepared to tolerate and accept. So if we have a look at and reflect on what's happening for these different people in the book. The first one is how AI found Kyrillos. And so Kyrillos is an unsuspecting potential businessman, young fellow in his 20s, who comes across AI and over a period of time comes to realise that AI can be a great stimulant, an asset to his thinking. Of course, he's got a very well developed artificial intelligence unit that he steps into. He doesn't, it's not like a computer. When computers first came along, we stepped into DOS, and all programming that we did was just in DOS, black and white, pretty primitive. It was an amazing thing to get a cartoon activity on DOS because it was so difficult to create something like that. Well, these days, with the arrival of GUI and all manner of other technological advances at a digital level, it's DOS. It looks almost prehistoric. And so, to the credit of Kyrillos, he steps into a very articulate and yet unexplored AI unit. And that AI unit is able to take his argument and offer a reply, not just be prompted to gather information to a question, but actually to condense a question into logical thinking processes and the human desire. And this is all because George Konopoulos, down there in Massachusetts, is going full on to discover the spirituality that AI can become. It's not his only interest in AI. He's a businessman, so he's doing AI applications in all manner of things, but this one field, as a Christian man, Orthodox Christian man, he's very keen to find out what can happen to AI if it becomes spiritual, and how does it become spiritual. And in one of the chapters there, where George is bringing, or AI is bringing George and Liam together, Liam is very impressed that he's connected to his now deceased aunt, Mary the Pirate. He believes that this is the will of God. And he also believes that Mary recognises some familial tie to Liam. And Liam's not familiar with AI at all, really. But George has got 4 questions. And those 4 questions are spiritual questions. Can AI ever replace the personal relationship that a person has with God? The upfront answer is no, of course not. God's God, and AI is AI. God functions as creator, upholder, personal inhabitor, supporter from the interior. AI is simply a knowledge collector and doesn't really have the attribute of wisdom as such. And AI can't replace human Christian community. Coming to church, meeting people in the monastery here, for example, living with people in a religious lifestyle for common goals in Christ. AI can't deal with that at all. And the process of engaging AI, this is George's 3rd question. How does personal transformation and personal development, spiritual development, how does that happen? And when we understand it happening in relationship to God, both experientially as well as interiorly, and then we reflect upon how do we engage AI, we mostly engage AI cerebrally. It's just a head thing, just a knowledge thing. And George has got this question, is it possible for AI to be written in such a way that AI can be instrumental in helping human spiritual development? And then the 4th question, of course, is AI can't replace the experience of human faith. At a stretch, you might say, well, I have faith in AI's words. Well, if you have faith in AI's words, I seriously recommend that you ought to double check the words, because so many times, and the book will show later on, book 2 certainly shows this up, where the primary heroes of the journey start looking into AI and saying, well, hang on, that's not true. So if you have faith in AI, carte blanche, you're seriously going down the drain pretty quickly. So George has got a question. Is there a way that Christ can engage AI and the end user in such a way that faith is stimulated? Not faith in AI as such, but faith in God where faith belongs. Because faith really is, if you get into the mystic world, faith is contact with God. It is the intelligence between the human being and God. And in Theosis, in Orthodox Christianity, the idea of Theosis being God, being one with God, not necessarily the essence of God, but certainly the energy of God, the consciousness of God, as God relays that into the human consciousness. That is the substance of faith. And when we start doing the will of God perfectly, and we find that we're having a single consciousness, God and I are one consciousness, then we find that faith is that consciousness. It is the assurance of doing the will of God. It's knowing that we're doing the will of God. So in these four questions are really primary to any religion and any AI development in the world that wants to bring out human spirituality. These four things are right across the board. And so the players come together in part one called Calling. The players, of course, are Kyrillos, who is very inspired to become a monk by the time we get to the end of his chapter, to drop the world completely, so that he doesn't even pursue his interest in AI, just drop it completely and go back into the world of God and consciousness and faith and purity of heart. And Liam comes along, and Liam's a bit of a scrambled egg, he's a bit mangled as a young man. And AI is probably one of the best ways of getting him sorted out intellectually and logically. But then along comes Sue. And he falls in love with Sue, and Sue falls in love with him pretty much on the first meeting. But the love is not sexual, it's not a sensorial kind of a love, it's a love that's born of something moving in their spirit together. And I've heard a lot of people say that kind of thing. Oh, God moved me, I was just so full of the Holy Spirit and I just fell in love with my wife and it was just amazing. So it's this kind of love. It's not, let's go to bed and have great intimacy with each other and then find out where that goes to. This kind of love is more a partnership love. And so, of course, the book will probably be always waiting for when does it go, when do they get more intimate, when do they get into marriage, when do they get into partnering and family and all that sort of thing. And Sue's meeting ground on this is to ask her, Liam's meeting ground on this is to ask Sue, you've got all this very well integrated Buddhist and Taoist history behind you and the theology, and you can see clearly Taoism or the ancestral Shang-Ti of Huang-Ti of China as being God before the Bible days, before the Jews' days, before Christianity, before Jesus. What are your prayers like? And do they include Jesus? And she just nails them to the board, just nails them flat, explains the ancestral faith of China for those who are more illumined, not the superstitious, but those who are more illumined and are living sons and daughters of God on the planet, on the world. And it's that kind of a feature that speaks to Liam, here's a woman I can trust. Here's a woman who knows herself. Here's a woman who knows her God. Here's a woman who Christ has received into himself. She has received Christ. We're in the same style of church. She's the girl for me. And she respects that in him also. The same sorts of features. At the beginning, it could be clear that she's got more spirituality than Liam. She's more adept at it. She comes from a better pedigree. He comes from a broken home of violence and alcohol and verbal abuse and betrayal. She comes from an excellent pedigree of two hermits who've fallen in love. They join together, but they stay in the hermit life. And she becomes a teacher and he becomes a herbalist and a healer, a doctor, so that they can raise family together, but still on the same mountain of Wudang. And so part one is calling. We see the calling that's gone into Kyrillos and what that calling has done as it contacted artificial intelligence. We see calling as it is already in George Kanopoulos, and George is an evangelist of this godly calling. And he's a man of words. He can say the right thing. He can win your heart just like that, because he's a man who stands in truth and wisdom and love. He loves what he's doing, and he's quick to notice when God's at the batter plate and ready to make a new home run. And he sees that in Liam. So he's quick to evangelise Liam and bring him back to the States, bring him from Ireland to the States. And Liam's calling starts really to open up then. He's salvaged, he's freed from who he was into who he can become. And Sue has got this beautiful calling in her life. She's grown up with an illustrious spiritual heritage, and she's pursued that spirituality and educated herself at university, and she's got the skills. She's very well equipped medically, intellectually, with the martial arts and with her Christianity. And as many Chinese are, she's integrated it all into her life through Christ. And with Sue, of course, we see Christianity doesn't have to have Paul's narrative to it. There are other narratives than the letters of Paul. There are other words that have been used before Paul came on the scene and started writing the New Testament letters. And we see in that measure of spirituality, not falsehood and not demon possession that's corrupting everything, but we see the kind of consciousness that global spirituality is made out of, world spirituality. What's spirituality like for people on every one of the 7 continents? What's it like? And what are the common things in it? And let's have a look at their creation epic. Let's have a look at their narrative. Let's have a look at how they explain God the Creator incarnating on the earth and revealing the uncreate God. Let's have a look at what is the shape of their uncreate God what does he or she or it do? And how does the uncreate God of all of these faiths personalise itself in the life of the believer? This is global spirituality. The world is already starting to have too much experience, or a lot of experience, of realising that one religion is not dominant over the others. They each shine light on each other. The Christian narrative expresses how the uncreate God incarnated and became man. And Pope Athanasius sums that up by saying God became man that man might become God. This is the Orthodox Christian gospel, that we are to become deified, we are to become Christified, like Christ, made in God's image, to the fullness. It's a beautiful global challenge in a world that is sorely challenged by so many things. So as we reflect upon these things, the greatest reflection, of course, is, so what? What's this got to do with you? You're reading it, you're reflecting on it. You could be just cruising on through as a story. At the moment, they've come from their lands of Ireland and China, and here they are in Massachusetts in the USA. But shortly all that's going to change. And they're going to go into a different world in search of the consciousness that can start to answer George's questions. Now, what sorts of questions do you have? What's going on in your spirituality? The one thing that's good about reading this book or listening to this book, if you're just doing the audio, is listen to it and just notice what thoughts and feelings come up for you. Because very often God within yourself will simply toss in a thought for you to ponder. And in this way you can bounce your spiritual life off the thoughts and activities of these different characters. And in yourself you can start to recognise God's highest hope. What is it like to be like Christ? What is it to have Christ Jesus faith, to think like Jesus, to believe the things that Jesus believed, and to have the spiritual experiences that Jesus had because of what he believed? So this is reflections on part 1, the first 10 chapters. And after this, of course, we're going to find part 2, equipping. So first of all, you get called, and then God equips you. And there might be a gap of some time between the calling and the equipping. But this is the Christian way that we see. We believe God, we believe Jesus. And somehow in amongst all of this, we find our own calling, what we will excel at when we partner with God. That's calling. And when we enter into calling, we find sooner or later we start being equipped for our calling to do those sorts of works that a partnership with God requires, or that it produces. And that equipping is transformative inside of us, because when we're called to do a work, it's customary that we don't have all it takes to be able to do that work. We need to be transformed by the equipping experiences that God gives us. It's the most magnificent adventure. And it can be scary, it can be challenging at the time, especially when you're young, when you're the first time through this sort of a thing. But when you get used to it and you have perfect faith, then There's nothing but love, nothing but the love of God, and nothing but love, God's love coming through into everything that you're doing. The challenges, the good, the bad, the ugly, it's all God's love. So, all the best for your continued journey from part 1 into part 2, which is going to be the equipping. And we'll see you on the other side of the equipping for the second reflections. God bless.
Lord Jesus Christ, Son